a really great melody, great lyrics, a great beat, a great chord progression, the instrumentation, the arrangement. All of these things matter when we're writing a song. And it can be very, very overwhelming when we try to think about all of these things at one time. So where do we begin? What's up guys, Shekinah Tebby here, aka Shay, and you are watching episode 5 of The Creative Quest. So in today's episode, we're going to start a series on one of my favorite topics of all time, songwriting. So this month is going to be all about songwriting. I'm going to be sharing a lot about my own personal journey as a songwriter and my songwriting process and things that I've learned in sharing those things with you guys. So in this video, we're just going to start off with 5 tips to become a master at songwriting. You see, when we think about songwriting, when we think about what makes a great song, there's a lot of different components. You know, a really great melody, great lyrics, a great beat, a great chord progression, the instrumentation, the arrangement. All of these things matter when we're writing a song. And it can be very, very overwhelming when we try to think about all of these things at one time. So where do we begin? In any creative process, creativity starts with an idea. So that brings us to tip number 1. Have a place to store your ideas. So a couple of different things that I use the notepad on my phone. That's really easy and accessible to open up. It's right on the front page of my iPhone. And I can jump into those notes and I can jot down lyrical ideas. I do this a lot when I'm driving, not necessarily texting while I'm driving, but I get ideas a lot when I'm driving. When I get to a stop, I'll pull out my phone and I'll write those things down in a note in the Note app on my smartphone. Second thing I've used is a program called Evernote, which is a really great way to organize your notes. A really, really great tool to organize and label notes, and you can put things in different notebooks and label them. You can have the app on your phone, you can sync it to your computer. That is a really, really great resource as well. And then the third thing is the voiceover app that every iPhone comes with. So if I'm thinking of a melody, or even if a guitar riff comes to mind, or I think of a lot of rhythmic ideas, that I'll actually beatbox them out in the voiceover app. I'll record them and label them, and then when I come to actually sit down to write a song, I can go through those different ideas and I can pick one to start with. I love to hear what kind of apps and different resources you guys use to keep track of your ideas. So if you have something that's really, really great that you love to use, put it in the comments below. And let's not forget the power of good old-fashioned pen and paper. I know we live in a digital world and all these technologies and resources are very, very helpful and they're really, really great, but never, never neglect the good old-fashioned journal, just like this one, especially for lyrical ideas. It really puts a personal touch on it. I know that there's something about pen and paper that's just different from a digital device. It also can be turned into a really great merch item. You can make copies of those lyrics and put them into a customized journal and sell it as a merch item for your fans. So that brings us to tip number 2, which is limit yourself. So as creatives, sometimes we get into a place where there's so many different options and there's so many different ideas that we have that everything gets so jumbled up and we end up paralyzing ourselves. Paralysis by analysis. And we end up not doing anything. And this is completely normal, but setting yourself with limits, giving yourself some boundaries, giving yourself a writing prompt to start from can actually help you get things moving. The hardest part is knowing where to start. So the last year I spent a summer and a winter, 6 months writing 2 different albums, and I gave myself prompts for each song. I actually divided up medium tempo songs, banger songs, and ballads. I knew that I needed a good mix of all 3. So I started right from the get-go organizing myself into, okay, I have this many ballads, I have this many kind of medium tempo songs, I have this many bangers. Okay, well, what is out of balance and what do I need to write next? And then I attempted to write a prompt. An example of a prompt might be, I want to use the Phrygian scale. Lay out your Phrygian scale, you'd write a riff inside of that scale using those notes, find out the chords that belong in that scale, and you'd start coming up with different progressions, you'd start singing different melodies, get the scale in your head, and then go from there and start experimenting with those things. Another parameter might be, I want all the riffs in this song to be on 1 string. In the rhythm, you want the drums to have a very specific time signature or a very specific feel. I want to put a diminished chord or an augmented chord in the verse or the pre-chorus. I want the bridge in the song to be very ambient. You want all the snare hits to be on the offbeat. There's so many different things that you can do and so many different prompts and limits that you could give yourself to give yourself a starting place to go from, a framework to work in. And this brings us to tip number 3, record yourself. Recording yourself is really, really important in the writing process because when you're writing, you want creativity to flow freely. You don't want to be worried about having to remember what you did and didn't do. So you want to have something capturing what you're doing in the moment so you can focus on being in the moment. So some great recording software, if you're a Mac user, Logic Pro X is what I use and I am really used to, that I really like. There's so many different types of DAWs out there that are affordable. I mean, even starting with GarageBand, just to get your ideas down. And GarageBand has improved and developed over the years. Even if you're just using the voice memo on your phone to record yourself, you can start there. I do recommend eventually working your way into getting a small interface like this one here. This is a Steinberg. They make really good stuff. This is the UR12. There's so many different great options for little interfaces that you can plug your guitar directly into, or if you're using any sort of amp modeling unit such as a Headrush or even an Axe FX, you can use that to get your guitar tone sounding really good going in. Also with these DAWs nowadays, and a lot of times with these DAWs, they now come with, different drum plugins and different rhythmic sounds that you can use in MIDI to give your song a rhythmic backbone. Capturing spontaneous inspiration is so important. You want inspiration to flow freely. You don't want to be worried about, oh my gosh, what did I just do? Like, you want to capture it in the moment so you can focus on the moment and let the recording software or whatever you're using, whether it's your phone, whether it's GarageBand, whether it's Logic, whether it's Ableton Live, or whether it's Pro Tools, whatever it is that you're using to capture your ideas, you can let that tool do the work so you can focus on being in the moment with your creativity. This brings us to tip number 4. Be intentional. This kind of comes as you're writing, thinking about where you want to take your listener, think about what you're trying to say with this song, think about the kind of emotion that is being communicated as you're writing the song. All of this kind of happens while you're writing, but I think it's important, again, going back to tip number 2 when I said starting with a prompt and limiting yourself, I think it's important to have some sort of direction and something to aim for and allow the song to kind of speak for itself as you're writing it and allow it to kind of lead you into what's next. So I think it is important to be intentional about what you're saying and how you can communicate that better and how you can bring your listener into that story. The greatest songs are the ones where the listener can participate in what you're doing and not just observe. Make them feel something and be intentional about where you want to take them emotionally. So one way to kind of be aware of this is having a basic knowledge of music theory, especially when it comes to intervals and how certain intervals portray different kinds of emotions. This is something that my songwriting professor actually showed me. He gave us a sheet, a list of all these different intervals, a major second, major third, minor third, perfect fourth, perfect fifth, and the different emotions that it invokes in people. Of course, this isn't like cut and dry. You can totally break the rules. Like, these are just like parameters and places to start from. But there's so many songs out there that are like, have like this happy-go-lucky major chord progression, but they're like really, really sarcastic or have really, really dark lyrics. If you're gonna break the rules, I say mean to break the rules. I mean, have a reason for what you're doing. There's this balance of writing from yourself, but also thinking about your listener and how you want them to participate in the song that you're writing. All right, here we are, the final tip. Tip number 5. Pay attention to dynamics. I can't say this enough. Nobody wants to listen to a boring song. Unless you intentionally want that song to be melancholy, unless you want the listener to be bored and feel melancholy. That's different. But you want to keep your listener engaged with the story that the song is telling. And so this ties into tip number 4 as well. As you're writing the song, as you're becoming aware of what you want your listener to feel, what you want them to think about, what you want them to do, you can start to create moments as you're writing for the listener. You can be like, oh, in this moment in the bridge, I want them to just start jumping. So you want to make sure that you have a drum beat that makes them want to do that. Or you also have to make sure that your song is at the right tempo for jumping, because it's so hilarious. There's nothing worse than watching someone on stage say, 1, 2, 3, jump! And the crowd can't jump to the song because it's too fast or too slow. It's so funny to watch, but it's awful. This again also ties back to tip number 4, where intentionality comes from. Certain songs call for certain structures. Like a ballad is gonna be a slower tempo. It is gonna have a softer, more legato type of instrumentation. And a song that's way more energetic is usually gonna have a faster tempo, is usually going to have an arrangement that is a bit more intense. The instruments are gonna be played harder. The melody is gonna be wailing and sailing and super anthemic. It's gonna make people want to sing at the top of their lungs, and not just sing, but like scream the lyrics. Now also when it comes to dynamics, I think it's important to pay attention to the different sections of the song as you're writing, creating things that are interesting for your listener. The backbone of the song should be familiar so that the listener has something to anchor themselves to. They want something that they can hold on to so that they can go with you through the song so that they can actually experience the song. If they don't have anything to grab onto, they're just gonna check out because they're overwhelmed. So keeping the backbone familiar, keeping something repeating, whether that's a riff, whether that's a drum groove, a melody. You don't have to write in typical pop form. You can write a through composed song. Composers do this all the time in films. They take a motif and they repeat it throughout the song, but they take one thing and they change it slightly. So it's familiar to the listener, but it's slightly different. So it keeps them on their toes and it keeps them interested as they're picking up these different things along the way that are new and interesting to their ears. So with that, y'all, those are my 5 tips for becoming a songwriting master and write songs that really stick with your listener, that are very memorable and that have meaning and purpose. So if you have any thoughts or anything that you've learned in your songwriting process, I know the process of songwriting and creativity is different from person to person. I'd love to hear about it. I'd love to hear some of your tips and the things that you've learned in the comments below. So let's keep the conversation going. And if you liked what you heard in this video, if you dig the kind of conversations that we're having on this channel, go ahead and hit that like button for me. Hit subscribe and ring the bell so you can be notified every time I come up with a new video. And stay tuned for the next episode where I'm going to share the one thing that changed my songwriting process forever, right here on The Creative Quest. What? This happens so... I know I love you too, but you can't be in the video. You can't be. Sorry. I have to let you out now. Come on. Go on. Try that again.